Hi, this is Barry, and welcome to the next edition of Simplicity Zen. My guest today is Reverend Lien Shutt. Her pronouns are she and they. She is a recognized leader in the movement that breaks through the wall of American white-centered convert Buddhism to welcome people of all backgrounds into a contemporary engaged Buddhism. As an ordained Zen priest, licensed social worker, and longtime educator teacher of Buddhism, Shutt represents new leadership in the nexus of spirituality and social justice, offering a special warm welcome to Asian Americans, all BIPOC, LGBTQIA+, immigrants, and those seeking a home in the midst of North America's society's reckoning around racism, sexism, homophobia, and xenophobia. Shutt is a co-founder of Buddhists of Color and a founder of Access to Zen. As the creator, producer, and host, she launched a podcast series, Opening Dharma Access, Listening to BIPOC Teachers, in 2021 with Lama Karma, Yeshi Chodron, Sister Peace, and Dahlia Bothwell. You can learn more about her work at accesstozen.org. She has just released her first book, Home is Here, Practicing Anti-Racism with the Engaged Eightfold Path. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Barry. Thanks for the invite. Glad to be here with you.
Yeah, as I've told Reverend Lien, I found out about her because she's, I've been to a couple of her Dharma talks, and she's also come out to where we live in Sacramento and spoken a number of times at the Sacramento Buddhist meditation group. And so decided to finally connect with her and have her agree to come. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, and so you're it's not in your bio, but you're the Dharma era Blanche Hartman, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And did you live with her mostly at City Center?
Well, yes. Lived there with her, and also when I had moved out of the temple, I like when I got I would do service in the evening and spend at least a couple days of the week there at the temple. Mm-hmm. Doing service and hanging out, and all of my retreats, of course. City Center is my time at Zen Center is predominantly at Tassajara in terms of the length. The 3.5 years at Tassajara, and Blanche was still abbot or abbess at the time. And I got my lay and my priest and my Dharma transmission from her. And then, my practice with her is mostly at City Center, both residential and from the outside. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
So I want to dive into your practice story, but I'd first like to hear about your book that you just released. Could you kind of give us a synopsis, and then maybe we could talk about a few of the salient points in the book?
Yeah, sure. So the book arose actually as a response. So and the book itself was in response to I have been formulating the Four Noble Truths into what I call the engaged Four Noble Truths to really make it a restorative model, which begins that harm and harming has happened, hurt and harm has happened as a first noble truth. Second, as not just the origin, but what are the causes and conditions, and more specifically, the systemic conditions. And then the third noble truth is the good news. And, usually it's the ending of suffering is possible, or dukkha. And so my take is more that where do we connect to agency, both individually and collectively, in the midst of hurt and harm? And then, of course, the Eightfold Path is the fourth noble truth. And in the engaged version, it's more that it's an empowering. The Eightfold Path is empowering.
Go ahead. Well, quick question. I've noticed in doing these interviews, people have widely varying definitions of engaged Buddhism. Can you give what your definition or your take on that is?
Yeah. So to me, engaged Buddhism is where is there social justice involved, where there's a sense of a systemic lens to things as opposed to an individual lens only. For instance, when I gave a talk at City Center, and I think it was, I can't remember the year right now, 2015 or 17, whatever, it was the 50th anniversary, I should know, of the Selma March. I had, from my studies many years ago, learned about the matrix of domination, by oh gosh, Patricia Collin, and it posits, and it's actually kind of the beginning of intersectionality. It posits that oppression, or of in particular in that work that she did at that time in the 98, I think it was, is that race, gender, and class were it. The intersectionality of them actually makes that much more oppression for someone when that happens. And so I had thought of it as like Indra's net. We always hear about it as a great analogy of interconnectedness, but the story is, or the way it's described is, there's a net and we're all jewels at the nodes where the nets meet. And yet we're the way that jewels are, we glitter, and so we reflect each other. And this is the interconnectedness. And at that time, thinking about the matrix of domination and the interconnectedness of things, I thought, oh, it's the net that we need to focus on more, not just the jewels. And so in a way, that's about how, not just in terms of racism, we often focus just on our individual, the impact that our individual, or how you hurt me or I hurt you, depending on whatever oppression or target we're talking about. And while that is important, we also need to see what are the structures that condition us to behave in the way we do. How do we, in race, how is the system of white supremacy, culture, and racism locates us all in that system, and we're all conditioned to take our position, and in that keep on promoting white supremacy culture. And how do we disrupt that? And part of that is to learn not only, oh, it's something that I can change, it's also that systems make it very hard to change, or system can be a way to change. And it's not just everything about, it's up to me and it's my fault if things don't change, right? Or that I can't do it or whatever. It's more that, how do we work together in that too? It's this collectiveness, which I think, I like to say that Zen, and when I say Zen, I mean so too Zen, because that's our practice. In Zen, I say it's a community practice. That's what we're really learning. I don't just, we move together in the Zendo, right? And so it's all about how do we interact with each other. And so the emphasis is on there. And in some ways, when we talk about social issues, how do we bring that into a more collective? And to me, that's engaged Buddhism, and also very specific to current events.
Mm-hmm. From a very, kind of practical perspective, like what are the practices that one can do to increase their engagement with engaged Buddhism? I guess that was an awkward way to say it, but I mean, so there's one way is to read books like yours, that brings up these points and do self-reflection. Imagine there's, this can be the topic of a Dokusan meeting where you kind of go in inquiry mode with your teacher. Would those be the primary, or group discussions, perhaps? What are the practices and the techniques to do this kind of work that you found is effective?
Well, this is why, honestly, have you ever in a Zen setting, or except for maybe when you heard me talk this a couple of months ago, in general, have you heard a talk about the Eightfold Path in a Zen setting?
Yes, but I've been to many Zen events, and so I've pretty much heard it all. But it's certainly not a common topic.
Yeah. So this is why I do have an insight, American Vipassana practice before I came to Zen, and I kind of stumbled into Zen, to be honest. So for me, that of course, all the sects of Buddhism, we hold up the Four Noble Truths, but certain sects focus on it more. And the Eightfold Path is certainly something that's much more insight or Theravada focus, and literally is the development of how to be liberated, right? Whereas in Zen, the six paramitas is the liberation of being a bodhisattva, right? That's how a bodhisattva behaves. And Theravada more, it's like, how do the Eightfold Path support you to achieve enlightenment or live in a way that's enlightened? And so specifically in this book, it is about how those Eightfold Path is supportive when you remember that you're living from a view of wholeness. So in a way, this book is Zen and Vipassana in the sense that it most more posits the part, like I like to say that, Mahayanists were like cheerleaders. We're like, hey, we're all Buddha nature, we're all enlightened already. Woo. And, mostly our instruction though is sit down and know that you are.
Mhm.
And just keep know that you are. Any other thing, just know that you are. And that's hard when systemically in our lives, in a lived sense, is no, you're not enlightened. You're not a Buddha. You're not whole and complete. You're not part of this. You don't belong. You're othered. And so for many of us, it takes a lot more specificity to know how to do that. And in fact, the Eightfold Path is that kind of specificity. And I will say that in general, now I teach beginning meditation a lot, and and it's been very popular at City Center. And I like to say that I begin in Zen and I end in Zen, but in the middle I do Vipassana, because it gives us much more tools for how to work with things. And part of that is the Eightfold Path says, okay, this is what is like skillful view, right? Begins with skillful view, and that's where it starts. And the skillful view is to understand the Four Noble Truths and to understand karma, right? Which also is not talked a lot about. Specifically, certain koans sure would talk about karma, but we don't get a lot of like, this is how things come into being in a specific way. And so understanding that sets our view. And then what is our motivation, right? So the Eightfold Path is very clear. This is your values, or it's broken into 3 sections, right? The wisdom section, or I like to say the value. What is your view, which is the Four Noble Truths and karma, to set your understanding of the world. Then the next is classically skillful thinking, but thinking is not passive, so thinking is purposive. So more popular these days is to translate it as intention or motivation or even attitude. I like motivation because it gives that sense of there's an intention and the drive, because that's what it's about. It's about how does your thinking and the beliefs that come with it drives you. And so this is also in terms of the Four Noble Truths, this is what we have to examine, because it's what sets us into action into the next part of the Eightfold Path, which is the classically called the ethical conduct. And I like to call it the compassionate connection, because it's about our interactive. How do we bring our values into the world? Skillful speech, skillful action, skillful livelihood. So that's classically it. I've reframed it as skillful speech, skillful enactment, because skillful action is essentially the precepts, more specifically the 5 precepts, right? The first 5 of the 10 grave precepts. So, but to me, these enactment means, again, not just like these are values I have, but it gives you that sense of how am I going to put them into action? And I think for Zen, it's all about enacting, right? Mm-hmm. How are you going to do it? Just do it, right? And then skillful livelihood, I've framed as skillful living, more as what is the energy? How are you going to use the energy that you've learned from having an enlightened viewpoint, a sense of what's appropriate, and then how do you make that keep on making that happen? How do you live a life empowered by your values and your sense of what you want the world to be? And then the meditative factor, the third set usually in the Eightfold Path is skillful effort, skillful mindfulness, and skillful concentration. And and there, what I learned from Gil Fronsdal, who's one of my teachers now, who started in Zen and for the most part now teaches Vipassana or insight, is that it's often thought of as a bridge between your values and how you are in the world. We sit down and meditate to think, oh, am I acting in accordance to my value? Or am I living in a way that enacts my values? So for me, I do insert those into the other 5 as a way to really find the support and find the sense of being able to shift. So, I mean, I can go into detail, but it would take a lot of time. But so, yeah, so the practicalness is part of, to me, what is explained much more in the insight tradition. And so the Eightfold Path is, to me, the beauty of it. It says, well, this is what is skillful. Like in speech, there's very specific ways of what skillful effort, there's very specific way. And then it gives you tools for how to do that.
Mhm. Is this, are these topics you usually talk about in a kind of group setting? Do you walk people through these phases individually in a like kind of a dokusan setting, or what are the, what are the mechanisms in which you
Yeah, so that reminds me, I never really answered how the book came into being.
Okay.
And it's because, so what happened was actually at a Generation X teacher conference that I went to in 2017. At that time, there was a lot of sexual misconduct in both the convert Buddhist community and non-convert, perhaps a community more convert, but the teacher was not. And so, they brought in right use of power as a restorative model for us to, have as a tool, which I really appreciate. But that and all the trainings I've ever been to on sexual harassment or gender or homophobia or anything else was often a model brought in, right? Usually, like, right use of power was developed by a social worker, so I love it, but I was thinking, what is it in Buddhism that is that? And so that's why I again reframe the Four Noble Truths much more as a restorative, which begins by saying things are not whole or complete anymore. The net has been torn in certain ways. So, and it started out, so I was developing that and was going to teach it as a, since I left the temple and started teaching, and got Dharma transmission, started teaching. Of course, we did precepts group because that's what we do. But I really found that the model for it is not just, weekly meeting, but I've developed this, which I've learned from various things that I was involved with, both at Zen Center and elsewhere, is that we have it's kind of like a long practice period. But for instance, the precepts, we do it for 8 months, right? Where we meet twice a month. One time is a teaching meeting, and then group practice kind of interaction.
This is a cohort going through it together.
Exactly, and we meditate, right? And then they have homework around that precept or that the 3 pure precepts or whatever, and they're specific homework. Sometimes it's a mindfulness practice or awareness, but it's a volunteer one this month to the group I'm working with now, or it's to write the precepts in your own words or whatever, so that it has a sense of how are you living with the precepts. And then every month they also have a dokusan with me. And then we have a meeting to talk about the practice. And then also part of it is then they have access to Zen meditation group every Monday. So it provides them with a Sangha to be a part of too.
And that's online.
Well, it used to be in person and now it's hybrid.
Okay.
Yeah, depending on the group. This group now that found me through the Spirit Rock, and then it's online because they don't live in the area. But it started out in person, So anyway, so having had that model, so this is in terms of after the Gen X teacher conference, I was developing this and getting funding from Hamera Foundation. Thank you to them to explore that. The anti-Asian violence stuff was arising into 2020.
Like in Atlanta and so forth.
Yeah, and I mean, that was when, like in San Francisco, there were all those news stories about how people were, being told to go home and being spit at and stuff. And then how in San Francisco, Chinatown, they started a group to escort people because of how unsafe it was. And all around the country, the reports were rising about how much hatred, racial hatred was being experienced. And I had a lot of students from East Bay Meditation Center, through my precepts group, through Zen Center, who are people of color. And then because of me being me, a lot of Asian American students, so they were reaching out going, help, I'm terrified. things are happening to me. People are spitting at me. People, we were all wearing masks, but they could still see your Asian eyes. And so telling you to go home or yelling at you or whatever. And so, I was trying to think, oh, okay. I was just going to do I was doing an AFO path as a monthly thing for 8 months. And then I did just about the pandemic, and that went well. And then in response, I did Lotus Rising from the Mud, how to address, I can't remember the subtitle right now fully, but basically how to support Asian Americans to go through this fear and this, from all the hatred, coming from even the White House, right? So it's kind of it started on similar model, the first one, as the precepts group. And through the funding, they're all covered where they had a PD with me. And that's the other thing. Do you know that I think in Zen, we are trained to have practice discussions, and not only just, hopefully, I mean, if we do anything besides just as a observer of Zen, by that I mean just coming to Dharma talk, if you have a teacher in any way, part of it is you have Dokusan or practice discussion. And that's not so much not just in retreat, but outside. And that's not so much, I think, in like in American Vipassana, right? At least in the Bay Area. And so they would have practice discussion. And the thing is, we have that teaching meeting, and then the next week we would talk about how the practice went. So it's very much based on coming up with a formative race memory, really examining through the Eightfold Path how we were conditioned to understand our location in the system of white supremacy, and then a specific way of working with it, like when we get to write speech, how to work with that. And then the next meeting is, what did you learn? What came up out of practice? So a teaching meeting, a practice meeting, to really, it's a health container of sharing and processing. I think that's the key, that there's always a group, a meeting about processing. So to me, I'll call it processing, but it's more like reflecting on when you enact with a practice, what arises. So in a way, it's Zen, but it's specific, as opposed to your teacher say, work with it like this, next Dokusan or practice discussion, you just discuss it with your teacher. In a Zen living situation, unless we happen to have classes or, for a while, like at Tassajara, they would have student groups to talk about things. But in general, your teacher is the one you process things with. In this model, the cohort is how you process things. Right?
Just a little more peer oriented.
Well, I lead it though, so it's facilitated.
Right. But as far as the communication arrows.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's that thing where we learn from each other, and we see the mirroring. And the big piece is that we see that we're not alone in that experience. Mm-hmm. Right. And the reason that it's cohort is that it's then you have this group of people that's going through it with you. Mm-hmm. It's like, again, like a practice period, here, at Tassajara, you could do a 3-month practice period with someone, and maybe you never did much on off days or off time with them. Mm-hmm. And yet, the way they walk down the path 100 yards away, or their feet as they're serving you orioki. And, they're people that, we did a practice period together. We might not know each other's specificity and content, but we know each other as how we have processed that practice period together, sometimes not verbally. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's the thing, is that practice in the book here it's not just a book for information. It's hopefully a way that you can go through a process both on your own and in these courses. Mm-hmm.
Remind me who the publisher is again?
North Atlantic Books out of Berkeley.
Did you reach out to them, or did they reach out to you? How was that connection made?
I did reach out to them. I will say Wisdom reached out to me a few years ago to write a book, 5, 6 years, 7 maybe by now, and I just could never pull it together. And so I started to write this book because the students, I used Gunaratana book, which I love, but students found them a little bit archaic. And so they kept, and also it wasn't always about race, right? Or hardly at all. So then they were like, we want more specificity, and also a rise out of the conversation, and also a Q&A, or couldn't be addressed from all that. So that's why I started to write the book as a companion for the course, because Amera was funding it as a curriculum. And then remembering that, I did reach out to Wisdom. They were interested, but then North Atlantic Book published Be the Refuge. You know that book from Tenzing Han that came out during during the pandemic. It actually is about how in that book, it's about young Asian Americans who are Buddhists, and how it's difficult in.
Oh, I have heard of that. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so it because of that, that's how come I reached out to them, and then I realized afterwards they also did Radical Dharma. They published Radical Dharma, so yeah, that's a groundbreaking book for sure. Yeah. Sure.
In the excerpts that were sent to me, seems like it's not just a conveyance of ideas; they're actually practices someone can do along the way. So it's a bit interactive. Is that, did I get the right idea with that?
Yeah, and that's what I meant by hopefully this book isn't, you just read it and oh yeah, okay. Yeah, I got some more. I understand a more 1, 2, 3, 4. More. Oh, let's pause here. And how is that impacting you? Or how is it that you can feel more grounded as you're, because when we're talking about systems of oppression, racism here in particular, it triggers us. It brings up stuff. It's difficult. So it's very much a process book, I would like to think. On one level, as I was writing it, one thing I came up is it's like a way-seeking mind talk. For me, writing it is like my way-seeking mind talk. And when you've done a series of way-seeking mind talks, I've realized one way to frame them is that each time when you evaluate your life, and the way we do it at Access to Zen is, because you're introducing yourself to the community first, or part of it, is you give you a little bit about your background. Then you say, well, how does spirituality or sense of honest or religion for some people, how is that introduced to me? And then how did I come to this practice, and where might be the edge of my practice? But each time you do it, at least my sense is you go, wow, this is how I've suffered. This is how I suffer less now because of practice or through some learning of practice. And then this is from that, insights or moments of small enlightenment. This is how I'm motivated to keep on suffer less for myself and others. So in a way, hopefully this book is to help you do that process for yourself.
Yeah. I'd like to talk a little bit about your Access to Zen community. Do you guys have a physical space, or is it all online at this point?
We came back to a place in the Mission, and then, like many people, the community that we had before many moved away during the pandemic, and then many found us. We actually were on Zoom since 2017, but mostly it was like one person who went away to school showed up every week. And now it's kind of the reverse, right? A lot of people on it. So it's always hybrid. And we were going to be hybrid every week. And then, we just have less people in the Bay Area. So we meet on the 1st and 3rd in person, and the 2nd and 4th hybrid. Online only. We're always hybrid, but doesn't in person.
So even on the in-person, there's hybrid as well?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so when you have new students come in, do you just invite them to sit with the group? I mean, what kind of instruction do you give to new people, assuming that they don't have a deep experience with Buddhism yet? Onboard new students?
Sure. Most of the people who find me actually find me through the courses I teach, in particular meditation training 1.0, unofficially 1.0, and then 2.0, which I taught for many, many years, 2 or 3 times at City Center.
I saw that in the newsletters.
Yeah, and for a while they were the bestseller at City Center as classes. now, everyone has apps and stuff. So I'm, meditation, especially after the pandemic, is easy to find these days. And with the popular mindfulness thing. And then also, at East Bay Meditation Center, I've taught it and other places. So most people find me through that, or one of the talks I give at Spirit Rock or whatever, East Bay Meditation Center, other places. Yeah, and that's how, so in a way, they already kind of know me when they come. Occasionally we have someone out of the blue show up, mostly online these days. And then anyone who wants to study with me, for the most part, they have to take 1.0 and 2.0, in part because Zen people, that's my opinion, in general, don't know how to meditate. And because of who I am and what I talk about, people come with real, not that we all don't have deep suffering, but people, and in some ways, have very specific suffering they want to address. And so to me, it's really important. And again, I'll say that, I start in Zen, I end in Zen, and then I do Vipassana in these courses. And the first one in particular, a 4-week course, because it gives us a tool to be that, to find that groundedness. That's really important, I think, to be able to be with things. I myself, think that all Zen students could use that, because I think for many, the way I've seen things is people come, and all of us, if we sit still, right? In Zen, we're really into sitting still. If we're going to sit still, we're going to find some calm. But the thing about meditation is that after the calmness is where the real work is. And if you don't have any tools for how to work with that, like, have you been to very many Zen, strictly Zen, where they talk about the 5 hindrances? Yeah. Right. So those are the Buddha taught as way to work with your difficult, very specific set of emotions. The fourth, mindfulness. And then, so then there's some tools to work with that, and not just talking with your teacher or your friends or whatever.
Personally, I think it's great that you have such a structured introductory program. And this is kind of my soapbox moment. It kind of breaks my heart how many people I see come through Zen centers, clearly intrigued about Zen, and they come up and they're just bewildered, and everyone's serious. And some centers make a point of having someone at the door to welcome them, but still, just the overall vibe is kind of serious and introverted, and and then everyone's kind of like lining up and bowing at the same time, and maybe someone's given instruction on how to do zazen and what the Zendo forms are, but they're just like, okay, after that, all right, you can sit here, and if something,
they never talk to you again. Yeah.
Yeah. If that intrigues you, come back next week and you can sit some more. And just so many people. I mean, I figure out of every 300 people that come through the door, maybe one person will stick around, and and I feel like we as a discipline, as a tradition, are not serving people well. I mean, that worked well in like Japan and China, where anyone who shows up typically is already a monk, already committed. Sure, it makes for them, you can be like, just join the schedule, and we'll see if you can hack it. That doesn't work for, I think, just the average Joe off the street,
Yeah. And to be honest, my experience in Japan is that they're not always monks that show up, but they're Sangha members, community members who come and are actually given instructions, or there's a much more, they come to visit the Roshi. There's just already this like communication, which is so big in Zen of student and teacher. I mean, they might not say, "Oh, I'm here to be your student" right away, the lay people. And it's not as vigorous, right, how they can enter the temple or not if they're not ordained. But there's certainly already a relationship. And I think that's the thing that convert Soto Zen hasn't translated so well. In fact, they poo-pooed it, and saying it's all the ethnic ones were too community oriented and not enough zazen, supposedly,
Right.
Which is ironic, because in Japan, the Hoshinji where I was at, which was a very small temple, there were usually only about 12 of us taking care of the whole place. If they're going to drop anything, they're going to drop zazen. Never miss service, but
Hoshinji, was that the temple that is by Bukakuji?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So
yeah.
that was
They're like
Harada.
back to back. The
That
back
was
doors.
Harada Roshi's temple back when he was alive.
Hoshinji is, yeah,
Yeah.
Seke Harada. Yeah.
Yeah. Seke Harada.
Yeah. A lot of San Francisco Zen Center people have gone through there.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Like Taigen Lane and
Mhm.
yeah.
So before we transition to talking a little bit about your practice journey, I want to ask you another question about your group. So after the introductory stuff and they feel an affinity, so they stick around, do you typically encourage people to go through the precept cohort and take Jukai or?
Yeah, so that's the other thing is that, the first couple of years that I started having precept groups, because, we were just trained to do. You did me Dharma transmission, and then how to be a teacher is to not just give Dharma talk, but offer the precepts to people. I was I don't know what I was say lucky. I don't know. For the first couple of years, I gave the Dharma talk on the mornings of those Jukais, and at the same time, I was running these meditation training classes, which I didn't bring up the precepts at all, right? In terms of like as a course. And, so students had come to the Q&A and somebody said, well, should I study the precepts? And at the time I was saying, also found myself saying it, which is true in my opinion, that in North America and in the convert centers in particular, meditation is like quote unquote practice, and it's almost the only thing of practice. And then we chant and stuff, right? And we do the precept, but it's not something that people see as part of a practice. And yet most of the Buddhist world, you begin in the precepts.
Mhm.
And in fact, like when I was in Thailand, tons of lay people would come to the arhat that I was practicing with, and there are lay people, and it's all about that was part of their precept commitments, right? So I was saying that. So then when this person asked it, I was like, okay, sure. So the next year I did it so that, whereas before there were students that practiced with me for a while who then asked me if they could take the precepts because they, were hanging out at Zen Center and stuff like that. And I was much more centered at Zen Center then. So I started what I call an engage study track. They didn't have to commit to going to do Jukai, which in essence is the same until a certain point where they have to do more practice. And also they realize that they have to commit to practice and me as their teacher for longer than the study time, the 8 months. And it was also the year in which an unnamed president became president, that we all were like going, what the heck? So, I had like 4 or 5 students, and then that year we had 25 people start. We ended up with 17, which is still an amazing number, because everyone was like, what the heck? And I remember going to Gil and going, oh my God, what do we offer people? And he's like, you offer them precepts. This is what grounds us, and you just do what you've been doing. But I feel like that was a big moment in which it also makes practice accessible to people. And actually, this has been one of the best programs ever, because people going through it are always like, oh, okay. And I frame it as, these are your values. How were you taught them? How are they effective in your life now? What needs to be tweaked about the way you think about them or believe in them or live them? And that makes a lot of sense to people, because that's what, besides the calm, that's what we're looking for, right? Like what is the meaning of my life, and how do I do that? How do I enact that? How do I live in that way?
So after someone's been practicing for a while, would you be open to ordaining someone as a Soto priest? Have you? Is that a part of the practice path you see for your students?
Well, I'll say that, when I got my Dharma transmission, the unofficial thing in the, Blanche's teacher was Mel Wiseman. And I guess Mel had said once that you have to wait a year before you can give lay precepts, and you should wait 10 years before you give priest ordination. So I was kind of, I did have a student who came from another country and was all gung-ho, and then I made sure he went to Tassajara for 2 years. And then, as in many people get involved with a center, you get caught in the whole, here's the abbot. So to advance myself, I better, come under the abbot. And I will say most of the people that I interact with now, and I think that's the thing, is that they don't have time or money or the means to go off for 2 years to go do something. And I do think that Zen practice is very much a temple or monastic, in particular monastic, because it has to be in your body. I mean, these days, someone has asked me to study to be a priest, and I'm willing to, frame things in different ways depending on context, their lives and where they are and who they are and all that, which is always true anyways, however much an institution might say they have a form. And the majority of the people who I interact with now, with my group in particular, Chukai is about as far as they go. Sometimes they talk about it, but then life happens, and something comes up, babies or job change or moving away or whatever. So we haven't gone too far on that. Yeah. I would. I don't actually need to, though. I would just say that for many years, I thought I needed a temple and all that, but now I'm really happy to be, flowing with the clouds and water, so to speak. Yeah.
Great. So now I'd like to shift gears a little bit to your practice journey. Is there anything about your early childhood, or even tween or teenage years that you see kind of set the seeds for later becoming a Zen priest and devoting your life to this?
No. At first I would say, sometimes I go, how the heck did I get here? Right. So one, I would say, I was born into a Buddhist family in Vietnam, and similar to many people, it was in the Pure Land tradition. And I should also say that my main memory is my mother going to the temple and offering incense. And I should say though that my story is that my birth mother got cancer, and later I found out since I was 2, and I was adopted when I was 8. And the last 2 years of my life, I lived in the corner of her hospital room, which was a cancer hospital, but it also was a war hospital at the time.
This is in Vietnam?
In Vietnam in like the 60s and 70s. I left in 73. And we were incredibly poor. And also my parents never married. So that was also a whole cultural and class issues. So I didn't actually get a lot of learning, literally. I didn't get a lot of schooling. So it's hard. So this is why I feel like and the culture in Vietnam, even especially then, is that it's a Buddhist country. Now it isn't so much well, it still is, just unofficially it's not, post-communism, or socialism, really. But it has a certain feel, I will say that I started meditating by going to dog-ear books in the mission, getting cassette tapes, used cassette tapes of Jack Kornfield giving meditation instruction.
Was this like during college years or?
No, I was already in my 30s when I moved here.
Oh, okay.
In college, I had a friend that started meditating, and I went to one, but I was in North Dakota, super white. And at the time, I had no clue. I was always struggling with sexuality stuff, which I didn't even know I was struggling, but I was, so that was in some ways, and also race stuff that I had no clue about on a certain level, because it was so white, and my white parents were pre-civil rights. They were a lot older, so they didn't even talk about race and stuff, and I think that was part of the issue. So in terms of practice, I was baptized when I was adopted. My adopted mother was quite devout Presbyterian.
Mhm.
And you know, one time she said to my sister and I in our when we were in high school, and rebellious, but you know, like this big rebellious in retrospect. But I had said I refused to go to church because they were, to me, hypocritical about the famine in Ethiopia. I was 16, you know, I thought I knew everything, you know how 16-year-olds are.
Mhm.
And I was, maybe I should say. So then so I had stopped going. I lost my, you know, allowance and everything else, but I refused to go. And she had said to me, and my sister was just standing there too, that she really regretted that we were not Christians, you
Mhm.
know. And then she died in 95. And that was one of the impetus that I moved to San Francisco, and I was already 30. I think I turned 30.
Mhm.
Um, and later, you know, I never thought I would be a priest. What happened is I started out at Spirit Rock in the Insight tradition, and I was part of the Buddhists of Color. And there was Jessica Tan was one of the. There were three of us who are the main caretakers of the Buddhist Color, and Lauren Leslie and Jessica Tan, who lived at City Center. Paul Haller was her teacher, and we, the Buddhists of Color, because of Jessica, we met in the Buddha Hall once a month at City Center. And at one point, you know, we were really good friends. And she was like, "Will you go to Tassajara with me?" And I was like, "No fucking way,"
As
because,
a to just visit or to live?
well, at the time, she's for practice. And I didn't understand at the time she meant a practice period. I just thought like because we were always talking about how can we do more practice, you know? And, you know, I didn't think she meant for a practice period, but I didn't understand that at the time. But all I knew was because, you know, when we were at City Center, there were just so many incidences in which there were racial stuff, you know, like one time so because it was on Sunday, which is actually the off day at City Center. But Jessica lived there, so we would come and, you know, we would go down to get the zabutons and zafus from outside in the gaitan and then bring them up to the Buddha Hall.
Mhm.
And so, you know, we would be traversing through there. And then there was something got stolen during the week. So when because Jessica lived there, she just was the one who answered the door, you know. And then we were there quite a while. I don't remember how many months, but we were there a while. But because something had got stolen during the week, all of a sudden they were like, "Well, you have to have someone at the door," because, you know, no one ever said it was that they thought it was us who took something, but, you know, like plenty of people. But somehow our group had to have a door person, and it couldn't be one of us. It had to be someone from the
But
Zen
and this was not
community.
and this was not a requirement for other groups.
Yeah, yeah. And it was after this.
Jessica's a person of color.
Yeah, yeah. And it couldn't be. I don't remember whether it couldn't be her, but it had to be someone from Zen Center, and it couldn't be one of us. So that was the other thing, right? Somehow we were not good enough or something, or we weren't trustworthy for some reason, because my memory of it is because they thought it was us, one of us, who had done it. So that's one. And then, you know, another one was, as we were traversing back and forth, you know, we didn't know anything about the forms. Most of us hated coming to City Center. I don't know if you've been to talks. In fact, the co-talk that I had with Tova this last in June, when we had Chukai together, when we both were preceptors, right?
Mhm.
She brought up how, you know, at the door people can answer it in a much friendlier way. Blanche used to talk about it, how that door is answered, right? Because so much of it was, you were just so like, did not want to come and ring the front doorbell, because the way people answer the door was just not welcoming in any way.
What? What do you want?
Yeah, like what do you want? Like, and, you know, later, now that I've been with Zen Center, or, you know, I realized Sunday is off day. And actually they did a thing a while back where they realized the people at City Center got the least time off Everyone else at all the other center besides practice period, right? Got 2 days off a week, but city center, your schedule is through Saturday morning, which is after the Dharma talk at 11, you're off, but then you're back on Monday. So you only had a day and a half. So Sunday was like your precious day, right? And there was nobody assigned to open the door on that day, or nobody in the office to open the door. So later I can kind of understand that, people are resentful and overworked, but at the same time, if that's the, and we all know that bias comes into it, right? So it's not just that people were tired and overworked. It certainly is a lot of bias, right? So it was always really difficult to come to the door. So people, for the most part, just as part of the reason that my group is the way it is, or has become the way it is that a lot of people of color are turned off by how much more they're taught they have to follow the rule, versus if, my take is if you go and you do something wrong, you might not get, talked about it. For instance, I was going to tell the story in which, so we had been there many months and we didn't know always the form, but Jessica, was tell us. But one time I came early because I was a caretaker, and there was a brand new person who came with us, and she was helping us set up. So again, we go downstairs to the gaitan, and then we bring things up. And we did not take off we did not wear our shoes between the Buddha hall and the gaitan, right? So the work later, I found it was the work leader, happened to come by and saw us doing that. So, so she follows down to the gaitan and says, you need to wear your shoes between here and the Buddha hall. And so we were like, okay, but like we're already down there in our socks. So we're coming up, but she followed us the whole way and kept saying this, and then make sure we put on our shoes, and went back and kept following us to make sure we followed that rule. Right. Mm-hmm. And to me, it's like, yes, you can say this is what needs to be done, but you don't. In fact, that new person was like, why is she harassing us? She told us that's fine. We're doing it. So this is what I mean by biased, like it's not just people are tired, whatever. So I don't know how I got started in this, but
yeah.
It
was, you were invited to go to Tassajara, but basically,
I said no fucking way because of that, right?
Yeah.
And the thing for me was so I'm adopted. I left Vietnam when I was 8. I wanted to go back after I went to college, because I took ethnic studies and realized blah, 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 blah. And then, but life went on. And then when I kept waiting for my birth sister to go back with me. And she was always too busy. So for 3 years, I just waited. And then finally I was like, okay, I got to do it myself. And so I went back by myself
to Vietnam.
And at first I actually had just graduated from getting my master in social work. I was going to go with a friend, and Vietnam was only going to be part of my Buddhist pilgrimage. We were going to go to India and Thailand, Sri Lanka, and all that. And then the last minute, I'm like, I'm moving back. 27 boxes in my sister's basement, most of it are books or Buddhist books. And then I went, and after 5.5 months, I did some traveling. Then I took Vietnamese and taught English to make a living. And I realized I couldn't go home. So when I came back, I was just floored, like, who am I? Because I thought I was going home, and it wasn't home. And yet America is not my home, right? So, and that's when Jessica Tan, I came back, of course, was like talking to her, and she's like, oh, I had a practice discussion with, at the time, she was only Ilda Gutierrez Baudequin. Now she's Ramon Gutierrez Baudequin. I had a practice discussion with her, and I said, well, what's that? And so I had one with her, and we were in room 10, and I was going, I don't know. I really just want to go sit for a long time, but I have debt on my master's, and I did it to have a career. So what should I do? And then she said, well, your body will tell you. So first she was like, stop talking. I have a way if you want to listen. And I was like, okay. And she said, well, your body will tell you. So for 5 days, you go home and you just pick one of the question. I'm going to go off and do some deep sitting. And you just keep bringing that up. Then for the next 5 days, you do the other one, however you want to formulate it, right? I'm going to go start my career.
Mm-hmm.
And your body will tell you after 10 days. In that moment, when she said it, I had this feeling of this part of my body and this part of my body went and met in the middle. But I was very good at listening and following instructions. So I did the 10 days and my body was just much more easeful about practice. So that's when I went to Sahara. And
had you done any sessions or Spirit Rock retreats prior to this? Like, did you have any?
Oh yeah, I had done a 1 month at Spirit Rock. I'd done a 10-day at Goenka retreat.
So you knew a little bit what you're getting into.
I knew what I was going to get into, but I hadn't done that session. And I went for the summer season. That's what I started. Because at that time, you could only, in 2002, you had to do the whole 5.5 months to get any practice period. And you couldn't negotiate. Now you can do like partials and blah, blah, blah. So I was planning to spend the 5.5 months because I had no money and a debt, right? And then to do one practice period, just to do a 3-month-long practice. And my sister, my birth sister, I could have gone to IMS because they do 3 months. That was the Insight place at the time. But we really missed each other and I was gone. So I didn't want to leave her and go off across the country.
She's in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
Or was.
Yeah. So that was my thing. And then, I like to say a big Zen bug bit me. And I actually wanted to be a monastic forever and asked to ordain.
Who was the teacher at that practice period?
Blanche.
Oh, it was Blanche.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you kind of imprinted on her.
Or she imprinted on me. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe I'm saying it backwards.
Yeah. I always go to racism. That's why I left Spencer. I thought, or Sahara. I just thought I would be there forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what? And so you felt an affinity for Zen practicing in that practice period.
Yeah. I don't. To be perfectly well, yes. I was going to say maybe not. Maybe it's just the monastic life. But I will say, when I started taking Chado, because Mayor Wonder became the Tanto. So she taught tea every 4 and 9 day. And I was a very devout tea student. And also,
this is like the
Chado, yeah. And, which is so much about form. And I'm a recovering perfectionist. And in fact, when I ordained, Mary Mosine, said to me, wow, you're a form queen, aren't you? So my affinity to Zen was, I think, a lot about thatness, and also the silence. I mean, I do Insight retreat once a year if I can for the silence. And Zen, on a certain level, the irony is when we're an early Zen student, we're like, oh, I want to be, I want to be la la la, I want to be whatever. And then later, as the more and more you practice, you're like, I just want to sit. I don't want to have responsibility. I don't want to do anything. Give me just stillness and silence, please.
And so what was your impression of Blanche initially?
Well, I'll give you a story. So that first practice period, I don't know if you know, but the Zendo Tassajara was to be temporary. When it had burned down, the original one down by the creek, which is the student eating area now, and so it has a tin roof, right? Mm-hmm. So that fall practice period, it rained a lot, and one shosan at the end of a session, right? It was so loud that we had microphones, right, to ask the question. And my thing was, I watched Blanche, and she was finishing. That was her last practice period as abbess. And I don't know. Did you ever meet Blanche? And
Yeah, in fact, the first session I ever did was kind of co-led between her and Reb, or maybe Reb led it, but she was there a lot. She made an impression on me. Yeah.
And Blanche herself would say that she's an extrovert, right?
Mhm.
And so I enjoyed her, like many people enjoyed her, but so when it was my turn, I said, and I will say my first year at Tassajara, for the most part, I didn't understand most of the Dharma talks. Oh, actually, Mio was the Tanto first.
Mhm.
And he actually
Mio Leahy.
may hadn't come yet. Oh no, he was a Tanto in the summer, and Maya came for the practice period, which is at the time when they would switch Tanto if they were switching one. And but Mio, like he wouldn't give any instruction on service, because his thing was like, you just watch and then that's how you learn. Which again, having been with Zen for a while, I understand that fundamentally we start out by saying, you're already perfect. You got it in you. Just let go of all the stuff that gets in the way so that you know that. And so we don't give a lot of instruction because fundamentally we're perfect. We forget the part where, hey, I need a little help, and so there was an instruction, and that was really difficult. And in fact, the person who asked about it was another person of color. And so anyways, Blanche, so I say to her, well, what is wisdom? And she, I actually, because she was so verbose, I said, I'd like you to answer me. And again, because we all had mic, like people were like singing, and it was just a very like interactive show song in particular. And so I said, okay, without words, please answer me. What is wisdom? And she paused, and then she pointed to everyone. Then I said, well, but what is wisdom beyond wisdom? She jumped off her chair. Those that chair that they have, and it's the one where it's a little raised, with the foot and thing. She jumped off her chair, and and I don't know if you've been to a practice period at Tassajara, but we're like, and Choki is very formal, and she just started to bow in front of me, like a full prostration, and I went down with her and stuff. So that's my story about Blanche.
At what point did you see yourself wanting to be her student?
Actually, I had another person in mind for a while, and that was a difficult relationship. I think for me, so the thing was that I was already having difficulty at Tassajara, which I couldn't. Well, I should say, it's not that I didn't understand. Riamon was kind of like my mentor at the time.
Who?
My Riamon Gutierrez Baudoquin, Ilda Gutierrez Baudoquin, the one that I had the practice discussion with. And she was a Blanche student too, and she had asked Blanche to start a people of color group out of request probably. And she and I were off, when she asked me how often she should have it, I was like, once a week, because I was looking for a place to go once a week. And the Buddhists of color was only once a month. So anyway, Ilda, was trying to help Zen Center with their racism way back then. And she and I had agreed that if I went to Tassajara, I could not talk about race except with her for at least a year, because we just knew it wouldn't be supported. And so I think, I came, and I think I was going through a lot that I didn't identify as about that, and really trying to get through with another teacher, but not as race. And then there's other things, because that's what comes up in practice period. And then it just didn't go well. So, and Blanche all along, Blanche is very welcoming. When I moved back from Tassajara and was at City Center and I worked in the front office, those are the days when we still had CDs for Dharma talks. We had moved from cassette tapes, but CDs, and she was a bestseller. People, because, and she pretty much had her, like many of us have, like our main topic we talk about all the time. And so they didn't change that much necessarily, her talks, but it's the way that she was so inclusive and welcoming and kind. And I think that's the thing that was finally like, and
she was
also
pretty sharp too. I thought like she was very,
yeah,
sharp. I guess it
I,
was
th- I think she could be, but by the time I came, she was more, because she had, I think that was sometimes a difficult thing for me. She was more, and also because Lou had started to kind of decline, she was more like, I'm not abbess anymore. I need to let other people. And so she wasn't always a great advocate for things. But anyways, I think for me it was that. And the other thing is, I will say, Blanche is a practice teacher, very much about you show up, you meditate, you follow the schedule, and you're kind about it. And my focus is this is why in part like why I am very specific about how do you meditate, is that to me that's part of what is the lineage or the way that I got it from Blanche. Is meditation is really important, and you need, there's the expression, right, the finger pointing at the moon. And as a teacher, that's what we do. We just go, you already know you're enlightened, but that's like how you can tell. And but it's not just the looking, right? But when you're talking with people who have I think that's the other thing, when you come out of monastic practice or even temple practice at City Center, on a certain level, we forget when you're on the side of Zen Center. By that, I mean, when you're just embedded in the practice, you forget that many people come and they have no idea what's going on. It's like what you were talking about. There's not enough instruction, right? And so it really, what I really got was that I can't just go, there's the moon. I actually have to go ... towards the moon. We have to be very specific.
Yeah.
And give some pointers. And Zen is against pointer because of it was reactionary to all the too specificity. So.
Like, how did you become her student? Did you ask for Jukai?
Yeah.
And at that point, it was pretty much implicit or explicit you were her student.
Well, because I had been Tassajara for a while, and because she was, my first practice period, whenever she came, I would have a practice discussion with her. And, we always had, we had a relationship because she was, yeah. The thing, at least in those years that my memory of Tassajara was that, everyone just saw all the teachers. It wasn't, except for Reb, was much more like, if you're my student, I'll see you. All the other teachers are really open to seeing everyone. And Blanche was always, besides Dokusan, she would come eat in the student area. She would talk to you. A lot of other teachers just hung out in the abbots' quarters or have their Dokusan over there, and they didn't really interact with the rest of us, So she's just much more approachable and inclusive as a person. I'm sure it's from her background of being, a socialist. So,
were you pretty? Did you know pretty early you wanted to ordain and be a priest?
No, I think me in terms of getting lay precepts. I think I was part of that. You get involved in a center, especially at the monastery, and you want that bib because everyone else has that bib, and also that sense of like, well, this is something about my practice. I'm dedicated. I think that was probably most of my first impetus. And by the time I asked to ordain, I actually didn't ordain till after I left, but a couple months after. But I already started obviously sewing and all that. Is that I really wanted to live a monastic life. I love the practice period. I love Oryoki. I was doing tea every 4 and 9 day. I was just really embedded in, we wouldn't say mindfulness, but certainly the mindfulness that comes from, and the concentration that comes from practice, and the silence, and the difficulty, but certainly a lot of openings for sure.
So you left Zen Center, while you're still training. What did you just want to be more grounded in society? What was your motivation?
Yeah. So my first thought was, okay, well, I'll go to City Center because then I'll have more mirroring because the diversity of Zen Center. I'm sorry, no, San Francisco, and also, Riyamon was there and stuff, and other teachers, get back into the Buddhists of color, blah blah blah. It started, and also I would say, as I was leaving though, Daigaku Rume, who at the time wasn't the bishop of Soto Zen, the Sotoshu yet, but he had come to Tassajara many times, and he and I would talk, and he kept saying, "You should come practice with my master. You should come practice with my master." So when I moved back to City Center, I actually asked Blanche, because I was so tired, to go do the 2-month at Spirit Rock. And so she said yes, even though I just ordained, right? Like in September, I ordained, and then their 2 months is February and March. And meanwhile, Daigaku was like, you should go practice, you should go practice. So I said yes. So April, I went to practice because I thought, hey, I've only practiced, in California and convert Buddhism. I should go convert Soto Zen. I should go find out what it is like, And it's a training monastery, 500-year-old. So, and it was fantastic. So,
could you tell us a little bit about that? Like maybe contrast it with the practice you had at Tassajara at all?
It's the opening story in the book for Roshi, for one thing. The thing is, on one level, I got really good training at Tassajara. And in part, I'm sure because I was a form queen, but my forms helped a lot because you hear the story and it's incredibly true. They do everything and super fast. And people practice all the time in the few moments you have off, right? And like at Tassajara, we would have about 10 hours off for our time off. There you got 4 hours off. And someone in your room always had to be in your room. So if there are 3 of you in a room, which there was 3 nuns in the room I was in, you basically only got 2 hours out, right? Because somebody had to be there and it has to be, equitable. So, so one, it's that thing where, so form-wise, I think I was very well trained. I think the thing I really learned is that, whereas, as I've said, the emphasis is on Zazen, and we think that that's what Soto Zen is. To me, the practice that I learned in Hoshinji is taking care of the temple and the Sangha. And so much of our practice was literally attending to the grounds of the temple, the cleaning of the temple, the feeding each other. I mean, only 12 of us, right? Oh, that's also one of the last places where they did takuhatsu. So we go out takuhatsu. And so that was a way of interacting with the community. And then, Roshi would have people come visit. We would go out and do ceremonies. We'd go out and clean the streets down from the temple. I mean, we were always just working hard. We would go up into the hills to gather food. I mean, it was just like work, samu.
What did you get opportunities to do dokusan with the Roshi there?
Yes.
What was that? How did those differ from?
Oh, well, that first chapter will tell you a lot.
Okay.
It's not. So here's a big thing: is that it's not like like a lot of what we think of practice discussion. My sense of what we think is practice discussion or dokusan, as I experienced it in my years, is I go and I talk and I talk and I talk and I talk. and a lot of it is, like we report and we say, this is how I'm doing it. Isn't that right? Isn't it good? And that's part, like, it's very more psychological driven. And, I'm an LCSW. And so this is one of the things I say now about practice discussion with me is that it's not therapy. And it's an opportunity to clarify practice, the teachings, how to apply practice in your life. But fundamentally, that's the tangible stuff I like to say. And then the intangible is how is it that two people are meeting completely, right? Which the secret is, of course, it's already happening, but it's kind of bringing in that sense that this is an opportunity not to be missed. And so it is much more bringing in what the heck is the important thing you need to know now, ask about. It's very much about the question. Whereas I feel that my experience in the United States is much more, I'm coming in to do my duty, to show up so that you approve of me, or, I feel bad, can you help me? Which I'm not saying isn't needed, totally needed. And how much of it is about, is this what is important now? What is important now? What is important now?
Did he speak English?
No, translated.
So there's a translator in there.
Also, I have to say, at that time he came out and he was like, I will not give Dharma talks during this practice period because you guys think you know so much already. So I will not. So then he would just show up like at meals or whatever and just give little teachings. But he showed up every time, pretty much every day for service in his little spot.
Would he be doshi or was it someone else?
No, usually someone else. But there were huge ceremonies, like the Founders Day is the biggest ever, and tons of people came back, and very, very, very formal. Yeah, gold and all that. Yep, and gold, and I think his thing was 49 panels or something, maybe even 100. I can't remember. It was some big number.
The Rakasu.
No, not Rakasu.
I'm sorry. The Kesa.
Kesa, yeah.
Yeah. And how long did you stay there?
One practice period, one Ango. He asked me to stay, but I didn't. I felt too much like a foreigner, because I very hardly any Japanese. And I don't know if have you been overseas much?
France, Canada, that type of thing.
When you're searching for a foreign word, then you bring up other foreign words. Spanish came up much more than Japanese.
Right. Gracias.
Yeah.
So, in your bio, you mentioned that you practiced in Vietnam. Was this your previous trip, or did you go back again?
No, the thing was, Daigaku kept coming at me to go practice. And I finally said yes, but then he had to go through all these steps to get approval. And the problem was, at the time, Blanche, I can't remember what the word is. That thing where the Sotoshu has to approve that your Dharma transmission is a certain level. And they had done one at Tassajara in whatever year. And she was part of that. But for whatever reason, maybe, I don't know, maybe gender-based, but they didn't approved that hers was real. So that I had to be like reordained by Akiba Roshi, who was the bishop of Soto Zen then. And he was gracious about it. And, we had a little ceremony and all that. And technically I went under his name as my teacher. But Daigaku did all the paperwork and took a lot of work. So actually he had to come in, actually my sister had to come in the middle of my 2 years for me to, or 2 months, sorry, at Spirit Rock for me to put my thumbprint as my signing to go. And so coming out of that, I decided, I should go back to Vietnam again, because the first time I went to come home and, it was like, and so now I just want to go with no agenda. But at the time you still needed a visa. I don't know if you still do now. And I wasn't sure I could get one in time because I had to go within a week to make that practice period, the Ango with Sekihara. So I plan to stop in Thailand first, which is how I ended up with the Arhat for 6 weeks, out of the blue too. And then I actually, when I went to Vietnam, it was to like just go, go back see my family. And I have a Vietnamese friend, American friend here, who said, "Oh, well, in that time I was going to go to Dalat, which is the birthplace of my parents, which I hadn't been." And he said, "Oh, they have a Zen place there, and you could do a guest practice like we have. It's 5 days, like ours, at Tassar, anyways." And so I planned to do 5 days, but I met this teacher, Mr. Thuy, and ended up staying and actually practiced for 6 months.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You described him as an arhat.
In Thailand. And he was.
And what would, like, why do you prescribe that title to him? Like, that was his official title, or
That was his official.
observation?
That was it. So in Thailand, the highest level is being an arhat. And what happened was there was I can't remember the temple now, but in Bangkok or right outside Bangkok, where they said, "Oh, there's this arhat or teacher who knows English, so you should try to make one of his retreats." So I kept trying to make one of his retreats, and so I did go, and he gave some talks in English, not really. But I sat for 5 days, right? And then I was in a van with some German nuns Meitchis who were, in that tradition. And we dropped him off. Well, no, he was in a different car, but it's a big thing to go visit, right? So they wanted to stop to visit. So he was considered an arhat by the Thais. And in fact, when I was there, he was considered one of the 5 highest, if not. He was such revered, there would be posters of him, but he was so revered that while I was there practicing with him, Thai Airlines sent him 2 gold cards because he always had an attendant, right? So that he could travel wherever he wanted. And people would come. This is where I learned very much about what devotion meant, because so every day we meditated from 3 to 6 p.m. and from 8 to 9, 10, 11. Because he then slept in, because then he'll watch, he had cable, so he would watch tennis. He was like obsessed with tennis and Chinese kung fu movies. And he smoked a cigar. But he was 92 already at the time. And he was different in the sense that he did not have his own place. He would just literally just travel wherever he was asked. But during the rain season, a benefactor gave him a place, a very rich benefactor. So he kind of had a place. And so these nuns were like, "Oh, we want to come see what your place is like." And they always had a sala for people to stay. And 2 German lay people were like, "Oh, we want to stay in the sala and practice with him." So then they were like, "Oh, will you do it with us?" And I was like, "Oh, okay." And that's how I ended up, staying there. And then they left and I just stayed. So for the time, and went with him to different places.
Did he seem pretty awake to you?
Yes. There was a moment, in which, so whenever he left, because a lot of we would go together. By that I mean I followed him to different places that he taught, different other monasteries to do retreats. But oftentimes he would go off to do blessings, at a house or a business or whatever. And so whenever he comes and go, we all have to lined up to greet him and send him off. And one time we were doing that, and I looked up and he looked at me. And, it wasn't like he never looked at me before. But I will tell you that it's not words, but I felt completely seen. But it wasn't like, there was no like, ah, No, there was nothing except for just not presence. I thought I felt with Thich Nhat Hanh many years ago, like that mindfulness presence that's so like oozing from him. Lumpu Kunlit, like
Emptiness.
I thought of that word, but I actually think I learned that in Japan more. It's clarity, I think would be the word. One could say emptiness because there was no word in all that, and maybe we wouldn't be far off, but it didn't. It was just so seen, but it wasn't about anything. That's a way that I would frame it.
And how do you think that affected your practice?
I brought him the same question I brought Roshi, and he was just like, "Oh, you understand it." That was it. The way it affected my practice. Here's another thing which I think is different from here, is that what I learned. So, he could only eat 2 meals a day and always by offering, even though he was completely esteemed. And so people had to bring him food every meal. And there were some people that came every day, traveling an hour or 2 by bus to bring him his breakfast. And then afterwards go to work. Then they would come at the 8 o'clock to sit with him. And they would do it every day. Right?
This is the devotion aspect to your.
Yeah, that's a devotion. And there would be people on the weekend, super rich, who would come and, give money and wanted, and then he would eat, and he had to eat from each plate. So usually it just took a bite, and then the rest of us would eat the food after, right? Then it'd just be shared among the rest of us. So, yeah. And then the other thing is, he was just like I said, smoke the cigar, watch TV. Our schedule is so that he could, watch those hours. It was just really real, but at the same time, it was the people around him, and the devotion of the people. Because there's that sense to me, if you want to understand Buddhism as a culture, I would say go to Thailand. Because it's just part of the culture. I think it's changed somewhat, a little bit maybe, because I'm talking about 2006 or 6 that I was there. And in a way, a very specific kind of, I think I was incredibly lucky. Or as I say in Thailand, boon is when you're the ripening of your karma, that you're just so fortunate that your life has led you to do this. And so that's what it's considered, that you can practice is merit,
Yeah, I assume you've been to Berkeley Zen Center.
Yeah.
Yeah,
not much, but some.
I remember a couple times I would go there for sesshin or whatever, and they would often coincide with like these community days they'd have at the Thai temple next door. And I remember like we'd be so like dour and serious, and they would just be loving life and and just kids running around and just this incredible smells wafting over from the kitchen into the zendo.
Yeah.
Like, oh, maybe I should be over there.
Well, did you ever go there for the food? It's so good.
I did, yeah.
Yeah.
I was vegan at the time, and I remember there wasn't a lot I could eat, or maybe
that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they eat meat in Thailand.
Yeah.
Well, all right.
We've blown past our time, so maybe we should wind it up.
Yeah.
So if someone wanted to reach out to you, is going to access to zen.org, is that the best
yeah
gateway?
Yeah,
Okay.
It is. Yeah. And the 2 is a TO, not the number.
Okay.
Sometimes we shorten it as A2Z with the number.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's a contact form or an email there where you can.
Yeah. There's a page for practice discussion with my Chico. I think that's the main contact. But nowadays there's also a way to get in. I don't know. I have someone doing my stuff now. Yeah.
And if I remember, there's a link for the Zoom. practice if they just want to come sit with you guys?
Yeah, so you go on the main page, accesslien.org, and then you go under the Meditation Plus tab, and it's a meditation group, and then the Zoom links on there. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Barry. Thank you for inviting me and co-creating this together. I
Cool.
appreciate you.
You've hooked me. I'm gonna get the book just so I can read the story about the monastery. All right.
Yeah. Yeah. All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right. Bye.